It's another episode of Getting to Know Seahawks Twitter, and I have the great pleasure of being joined by my friend from over at NBC Sports Northwest. It is the one and only Mr. Joe Fann. Joe, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, Paul Wall, the Iceman. What's up, brother? How are you, man? I appreciate you having me.
I'm doing well. I appreciate you giving me the same nickname as a Houston area rapper, though he is infinitely cooler than me. He's the guy with the grills, right? I should know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
My old producer's going to get really mad at me.
Yeah, your grills.
Damn.
You know, the age-old hit that is,
I'm so bad with this, and we actually had a period when I was in Houston where my producer of the radio show that I was doing introduced me to a bunch of Houston area rappers, and I'm still bad when it comes to all rap music. So I'm going to awkwardly transition the best way this white man can into talking about the Seattle Seahawks. Oh my goodness gracious, Joe, we are still dealing with the great Russell Wilson trade crisis, and the most recent, I guess, development, I don't know if it's even a development, is this idea that the Seahawks maybe need to publicly say that they're not trading Russell Wilson. I don't know if I subscribe to that idea, but what say you?
They've never been a team that feels the need to just comment on something because the public feels like they need to. Like if in their head and they've talked to Russell Wilson and say, we're not trading you, we're not really listening, teams are calling and whatever, then like that's how they're going to do business. I don't think they mind when they're in the news and people are talking about them and whatever. I think they are, for better or for worse, even one of the more secure teams in that standpoint, in terms of like not feeling like, well, the people are talking about this, so we have to, and they're like, let them talk. We're not trading Russell Wilson, and he's here, and I get he's frustrated and all those things. Like, let people talk about it. What does that? Does it mean anything at this point in late February? So the fact that there's no combine this year makes a difference because it takes longer to hear from them. Maybe they decide to plan pre-free agency press conferences with John and Pete. But yeah. They've never been a team to subscribe to that sort of theory, and so I don't see why they'd start now.
How do you think Russ feels about that aspect that you just highlighted? Because that is a good point, and I wonder if Russ thought this maybe would play a little bit differently because he made a bunch of demands either directly, whether it was on Dan Patrick or in that Zoom press conference with you guys for the Walter Payton Man of the Year. Grats on that, Russ. Or it was through his court, whether that's Mark Rodgers or Colin Cowherd speaking for Mark Rodgers or speaking for Russ, or it's Brandon Marshall, who we have heard from as well on First Things First. But I imagine that Russ, in a way, may be either enjoying the fact that the Seahawks are dealing with all of this criticism, but on the other hand, I bet that he at the same time would probably want to get a little clarity and that maybe he thought some would be coming with the way that he's handled this.
Well, he might. I mean, they've certainly spoke. I mean, guarantee you, when John Schneider and Pete Carroll see that come out, right after the Super Bowl, they're picking up the phone, calling Mark Rodgers and saying, hey, what's the deal? What's going on here? Because I'm pretty certain from the conversations I've had, they were blindsided by it and were really surprised. And I think that was the idea for Russell Wilson. I think to me, it's more about just having it out there that people know he's frustrated, to where if things end up going south again in 2021, he can say, listen, I put them on notice. I tried to get the urgency to get things to be turned around. It didn't work, to where next year, if it ends up actually getting traded, it wasn't just kind of this random, wow, woke up one morning and now he's getting traded. This is something that's been building. And I think that's what Russell Wilson is trying to get across of. I'm not just mad about the Rams loss. This is something where I feel like, I've been hit too much over my 9 years in my career. I don't have a seat at the table the way I feel like I should after 9 years from a personnel decision standpoint. So there are a number of layers to this, and I think this has been crescendoing for quite some time. And that's why I don't think, it's less about the action that comes immediately, because at the end of the day, what's Seattle really going to do in like the week or two after he says that, other than say he's not getting traded? It's much more about the public knowing that, hey, Russ is pretty annoyed right now, and let's see how Seattle responds.
Right, and they're not going to hold a press conference, as you said a little bit earlier, to say, we are not trading Russell Wilson. They're not going to do something like that, calling it through like a horn or bugle or something along those lines. I do wonder what happens next. I mean, you mentioned, all right, it's not happening this year. Maybe it could happen the next year. I just feel like they'd be so stupid to trade Russ. Any team would be stupid to trade Russ. I feel like you drag this thing out as long as you possibly can, which would include giving him the franchise tag after franchise tag once this contract runs its course, unless he starts playing like we saw Cam Newton play this past year.
Yeah, it's really hard because you look at, Russell Wilson wants a revamped offensive line. That costs money. They need to figure out their corner situation. They need to figure out their pass rush situation. They need to figure out what's happening at running back. They need to, figure out, can they get KJ Wright back or not? I mean, there's so many different areas and you look at every team is dealing with the cap space, kind of issues for the most part, given that it went down. But the Seahawks certainly are right in that mix of, they don't have a whole lot of cash to spend. They're going to have to get creative to figure it out. And there's going to be areas where they have to ball on a budget. And typically that's been on the offensive line. Now Russ says that's not going to be kosher with him anymore. And so we'll see, but the Seahawks are sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place because they only have 4 draft picks in 7 rounds in the upcoming draft. And from that standpoint, John Schneider owes it to himself and owes to the organization to listen to what teams say. If 10 teams have called already, you can't hang up on them because there is a price on everybody. There is a point to where you have to pull the trigger. There's also, you owe it to yourself to know what the offer is. What's the price tag? And that price tag might go down after next season because teams say, hey, now it's only 2 years instead of 3 years. And there's no guarantee he's going to re-sign with us. And so now, instead of 3 or 4 first round picks, it's 2 or 3. And instead of 2 young stars, it's just 1. So it is a really convoluted situation. That's which makes it one that is interesting in that it's worth following throughout, but also annoying in that you're not necessarily going to have a resolution that, comes to pass in the next 10 days.
Right. Put your GM hat on. I know Mike Silver said, it is on. That's true. Mike Silver said it would take 3 first-round picks for the Seahawks to even continue the phone call. But what would you accept for Russ? And knowing that, you might get first-round picks, but I'm guessing if you're trading Russell Wilson for first-round picks, those first-round picks are likely going to be at the back of the first round because I feel like he can turn any team immediately into, at the very least, a playoff contender, if not a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, it has to be 2 or 3 or 4, depending on where they are. It would have to start with a guaranteed, in my opinion, top 10 pick. It can't be future firsts and all of a sudden Russell Wilson's got this team in the playoffs every year. And like you mentioned, they're in the 20s. But I think it has to be 3 first-round picks with at least 1 top 10. And then if it's top 5, then maybe you can get away with 2 first-rounders and then a player. Like a Nick, we're talking good, Nick Bosa type, right? Like this is a
borderline star,
cornerstone type player. So I think, 3 picks, 2 players to me, and then the Seahawks at some, probably throw in a third or a 5th or something in that regard. But I think it's got to be players as well as draft capital, an immense draft capital, and not just immense draft capital, but towards at least 1 pick guaranteed at the top of the first round.
You mentioned the 4 draft picks they have. I'm curious as to how they operate this year going up to the draft because this is a different year. They have shown no hesitation the last couple of seasons when it comes to trading draft picks for veterans, whether it was Jadeveon Clowney or Quandre Diggs or Jamal Adams or Carlos Dunlap. I mean, they've been going after them. And go even further back, you could say the same thing about when they went after Dwayne Brown. A little bit differently now you look at it, though, because of just having 4 draft picks. Do you feel like they are more likely to, 1, use the draft picks that they have right now still to get more veteran players and potentially say, all right, well, this year, it's going to be tough to draft as it is. Maybe they use that 2nd-round pick, swap it for another vet. Or do you think that they are likely to trade some player, some surprise player, to stock back up on picks the same way that they did with Frank Clark a little bit ago? You have to pick one or the other.
Who do you trade, though? That's I think is the issue. And if you're trading for a player, you don't have the cap space to pay him. So that's the issue is if you load up on veterans, that's great. And you have what, you like to think is proven talent. But at the same time, you don't have anybody who is that value contract because they were a third, fourth, fifth round pick that hit and is playing really well and they're a starter for you. So that's kind of the issue. In terms of who they would trade, I don't even know who they'd trade because teams aren't in a position to take on a bunch of cap space. So who do you even have that teams would want in that regard? So I don't know. I don't think either really happened. I think maybe something small, but I don't think you're looking at anything seismic. I think it's figuring out who of the free agents you're able to bring back. And I think it's going to be less than more. Maybe franchise tag Shaquille Griffin, but that's going to be 50. I just don't know how they afford anything.
Yeah.
So I think these next 2-3 weeks, unless they can get some extensions done, I don't know how they're going to create the cap space needed to get guys on board or even just keep their own. So this is a tough spot, which I don't know how you look at where they finished last year. Then you look at how are they going to get better, especially when you consider who they already might be losing. Okay, well, what is the step forward? And maybe it's just a weird year and, other teams are going to be the same situation. So they've got to cut, talented veterans from a cap casualty standpoint. And they all signed 1-year deals on a pretty good team friendly rate. And for 1 year, you kind of have this blip year where players are playing largely below market value. So I don't know. It's such a pressure packed offseason. It already was. And then Russell Wilson says what he says, and now the team's on notice, and you can't regress for a second straight year. And I think if they do, you're really talking about the championship window being closed. And if it's still opening, it's certainly not at its peak. Because if you say it's at its peak, that means they're one of the favorites to win next year, and they're not. Yeah. And so if it's still opening, well, what are you pointing to that says it's still opening? Who are you spending your money on? Who are you going to draft with your 4 picks that are really moving the needle? And yes, maybe Jordan Brooks, Marquise Blair, Darrell Taylor, some of those young guys, Colby Parkinson can emerge and be players. But if you're banking on that as the reason why you're going to get back to where you'd like to be, you're kind of, counting stars and really just hoping and wishing rather than thinking that you have some concrete evidence of why this thing's going to turn. So it's crazy because you can't waste $7 million on Greg Olsen. You can't waste, $5+ million on BJ Finney, and the list goes on. They're going to have just absolute deadly accuracy with everything they do over the course of the next 6 months.
KJ Wright, one of those names that might end up leaving. We've heard from him now twice this week. First on Jim Rome, now I guess on Sirius XM satellite radio, saying, look, I want to get my money. So I'm wondering if he ends up being gone. And also, Chris Carson's a big question too. That's a guy that I wonder about. I have a question about him for a moment, but fret not. The Seahawks did re-sign a running back. Alex Collins, back.
Yeah.
Championship.
Yeah. That's it. That's all you needed. Everyone can sleep easy at night.
What do you think they're going to do at running back? I mean, Chris Carson is a guy who, I threw this up on Twitter last night. He maybe isn't as injury prone as we make him out to be. He's played in 83% of the Seahawks games over the last 3 years. For a violent position like running back, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. And I think he has shown a lot of toughness, especially after Tristan Hill tried to rip his leg off. But at the same time, availability is a big thing. And if you're Chris Carson, you haven't been there every single game. And specifically, you look at the playoffs last year and probably say that's a guy that they needed with the amount of times they were trying to run the football. So what do you do? Because I just wonder about the idea of a long-term contract for him, given some of the injuries that he suffered in the league and also the torn ACL that he had in high school, which is the reason he didn't end up going to Georgia.
It's tough, man. Again, it's so hard to make any predictions about any of it because there are other shoes that there are dominoes that have to fall before free agency even gets here to where you feel like they have the capital to do anything. Because right now they can't afford anybody. And, Chris Carson, like KJ Wright's not going to take a hometown discount. And I know he's hoping for, in the ballpark of 8 to 10 per year. And, this is a bad year to be a running back wanting to get paid. It's a bad era of football to be a running back wanting to get paid, but especially right now with the cap going down, teams just aren't going to prioritize him the way they would maybe in other years. I really do think Chris Carson's a special talent. But this is his one time to cash in. You know, Shaquille Griffin might have multiple contracts. KJ Wright has already had multiple contracts. Where this is KJ Wright's probably last time to cash in, and I totally understand him not wanting to give a hometown discount. He had a fantastic year. He was an absolute stud for the Seahawks, and you know, to say I'm taking a discount and then have a rookie potentially play in front of me, like, no, thank you. I'll go play somewhere else. With Chris Carson, this very likely is his only time to cash in, take care of his family, get that set for life type money, and then never worry about it again. So it's hard to imagine the Seahawks being able to do that. I know they want him back. I think, you know, or I know that Chris Carson wants to be back, but I just don't know how they make it work financially, given the other kind of positions and names that we've talked about that would seem to me to be much bigger priorities, at least in the immediate future. So should his market not be there and materialize in the way in which he's hoping it will, and is confident it will, then maybe he comes back. And the same thing for KJ Wright. But I would lean both of those players not being back with Seattle in 2021.
Hopefully the running back market's oversaturated and that makes it a little bit easier. But yeah, I have that kind of feeling too. And I do wonder what you do if he ends up walking, because you're going to draft another running back in the second round. Is Rashad Penny going to be better this season than he was after coming back from injury at the end of last year? We'll see. What's the position that no one's talking about this offseason? Because we've definitely talked a lot about Russell Wilson, that's for sure. Honestly, too much for my taste. I'm sure I'm going to be talking about it tomorrow for some way, shape, or reason. I'm tired of it, to be perfectly honest. But whatever, that's the way that things go. What position are we not talking about, though, that we probably need to be?
Yeah, so if we're talking about the positions that I think have been talked about a ton for good reason, left guard and center, huge. Corner, pass rusher, especially if they cut Carlos Dunlap, which they likely will, to save 14.1, and maybe they try to get him back cheaper. Those are maybe the big four that I would look at: pass rush, left guard, center, corner, and then running back. But I would say tight end and wide receiver are also areas that need improvement. You need a guy who is more dependable than David Moore. And David Moore had some big moments for this team. But you need a third receiver who is much closer to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett than he is David Moore. You need to get more production out of the tight end position. So whether Will Dissly is, you know, finally back to full strength off the Achilles in 2021, great. If Colby Parkinson's the guy, fantastic. He never really got a shot as a rookie. Jacob Hollister sticks around, great. But my guess is they add a guy there as well, whether it's Gerald Everett from the Rams. There have been reports I've seen that Jonnu Smith from the Titans is going to be a coveted piece by the Seahawks. That would make sense. The hard thing is, you know, that's, you know, more champagne problems because they have good players. Those spots, when you look at like the other ones I mentioned, that you have to have a left guard.
Yeah, you don't even have one.
A center.
Right.
Like you got to figure those two out. So I guess the way I would finish that answer is I'm not sure anything isn't being talked about enough, because the ones I just mentioned are so much lower on the priority list. Even if they're next in line, the gap there is, you know, there's just so many other boxes you have to check if you even want to get back to where you were in 2020, let alone take a step forward.
That's going to be tricky. You're right. And the offensive line or the defensive line, those are the ones that I look at, because I can't help but go back to the Super Bowl and look at all the guys that the Bucs have on the defensive line, whether it's Vita Vea or Ndamukong Suh, or on the edges, it's Jason Pierre-Paul, who has been just phenomenal the past season, or on the other edge, you have Shaquille Barrett. That defensive line was able to get after the quarterback, and the Seahawks last year, they did create pressure at the end of the season, but it felt like a lot of that came not just because they added Carlos Dunlap, but because they just decided to change their stripes on defense and start blitzing a whole lot. And there's a part of me that thinks, well, if you blitz and blitz and blitz some more, eventually you're going to get beat. So maybe you aren't able to beat, maybe Jared Goff with a broken thumb doesn't really take you out behind the woodshed and beat your defense up a whole lot, but with Aaron Rodgers going up against you and a lot of blitzing, that probably would have been very ugly. And I would say the same thing even for 43-year-old Tom Brady.
But again, like, look at what's on the Bucs roster. I mean, it's blue chip players through and through,
Yeah.
and it's top 10 picks who have, you know, either finally developed or have made immediate impacts. And so, and they made absolute money free agent additions. So I don't know how I don't say the Seahawks turn their roster. The reason why they traded 2 first round picks for Jamal Adams because they needed another blue chip type player, and they got one. But the Bucs top to bottom were a loaded team before the season started, and it was one of those things like if they can figure out how to put it together, they're going to be potentially a champion. I was of the thought, I don't think they're going to put it together. I was doubting Tom Brady like a moron. But then it clicks and it's not like, oh, this guy's good. That guy's good. It's like, the defensive line with Vita Vea, Shaq Barrett, Jason Pierre-Paul, and Ndamukong Suh is good. Like, yeah, it's good. Linebackers, Levante David and Devin White, that's good. Yeah, it's good. I mean, these are, elite players. The secondary, I think, was the one area that was better than people expected. But when the defensive line is as good as it is, when it's clicking, that makes those guys' jobs a lot easier. Look at the offensive line. You just spent a top 10 pick on an offensive lineman. He was a stud. Look at the skill players, absolutely loaded. It's like a Pro Bowl roster. So you don't look at the Seahawks and say they're 1 piece away or 2 pieces away from being that level of talented. So, then it puts the pressure on Shane Waldron. How much can he make an impact to where, maybe he can mitigate. Yeah, you don't have the capital to get where you need to be, but maybe he unlocks something in Freddie Swain that, we didn't see as a rookie, where he was a serviceable guy, but probably is more of just a guy than he is a real difference maker. Maybe he is the guy that gets Will Dissly cooking again. And makes Coley Parkinson, look every bit the 4th round pick that, where he was taken. So I don't know. I'm kind of going in circles here, but when you say you talk about, it's all about the trenches, and it is, you're not wrong, but it's so much easier said than done and just say like, load up in the trenches.
Yeah.
Either paying a ton or you're using a high draft pick and they don't have a 1st round pick. Who is their left tackle of the future?
That's a great question.
Idea.
Yeah.
When are they going to get their left tackle of the future? I have no idea. That's a position that's taken in the top 15. And they're not in the top 15. So, and that's when you start thinking about this of like, are they really getting closer? Are they really on the cusp? Because if they're not, and if John Schneider is willing to make a big, decision, but admitting that their window isn't there anymore, then it almost behooves you to trade Russell Wilson. Because then all of a sudden you get this immediate stockpile of draft picks to where if you can hit on those, it can be a bit of a retooling rather than a full rebuild. And that's not saying I'm saying they should do it. I'm just saying that's why you can't hang up the phone, because you're not set up going into this offseason to reload and be this super team to where teams are, everyone's expecting you to be it's Seahawks or bust. I just don't know how we end up in August thinking the Seahawks are, anywhere near the odds-on favorite to win.
There's something you said a little bit ago about with the Bucs, and that's got the wheels of my head turning, and it's about the Bucs and all of the blue chip players they have. There's a reason they were such a trendy pick over the last couple of seasons of, if Jameis can get it together. If Jameis can get it together. And I mean, they finally did get it together. It took Tom Brady and stuff, but you're right. I mean, top to bottom, my goodness, that roster is loaded. Kansas City makes it to the Super Bowl too. They've got a lot of blue chip pieces. I suppose that, and I'm not suggesting this either, you move on from Russ and get all these first-round draft picks, great, but you got to hit on them, and that's totally easier said than done. And the other thing, too, I mean, John Schneider looks at first-round picks, I think, a little bit differently than a lot of other organizations, seeing as they're always drafting in the back of the first round. And I guess, for Kansas City, they do have Patrick Mahomes, too, but they have guys like Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill and Tyrann Mathieu and Chris Jones. I mean, they have their own playmakers like that. And when you look at the Seahawks, it's Russ. Looks like it's turning into DK Metcalf. You can make a strong argument for Tyler Lockett. I think Bobby Wagner's still there, but I don't know. Jamal Adams, I think, can be that guy. But there's more questions about all of those guys that are potentially in that blue chip range. And how much does Russell Wilson make up for that lack of, I guess, star talent that even teams like New Orleans have after their quarterback, who is decrepit a little bit, just a little bit?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. The Seahawks have not drafted well. I mean, they went through a 3-4 year stretch where they drafted not just like poorly, but like really bad.
2017 was awful, right?
And the number of second and third round picks that were just swings and misses. There was one year, was it 2017, where they had like 6 picks in the first 2 or 3 rounds? I think
so. And I mean, all you have out of it, you finally saw Ethan Posick do something, and you have Shaquille Griffin. I mean, Shaquille Griffin, that's a good pick for the 3rd round, but
Shaquille Griffin's a fantastic pick.
Right.
That's an A+ pick.
Right. But everything
else is like D's and F's.
Yeah. I mean,
so that's the thing. It's like, you can't tell me like, oh, this guy's playing. Okay, well, he's playing because he has to play. But is he contributing? Is he a guy? Is he a difference maker? Is he a player that you can win because of and not just with? So it is a huge challenge. I mean, and the Bucs are going to come into their own challenges because every team gets there. You get too expensive. And, imagine a team that has Chris Godwin not being able to pay Chris Godwin. But the Bucs might be there where they might not be able to keep a superstar wide receiver in Chris Godwin. So that is how it all goes. And that's the beauty of the NFL. And that's why it's all set up to be this socialist league that where everyone goes 8-8 and the parity is even across the board, and that's the design. And the Seahawks are getting into that place where I think they are fighting to keep the window open rather than truly being this team on the rise.
I do think the last 2 drafts have been good. Darrell Taylor's the big question, but the problem is, what does that get you at this point, and how much pressure does that put on the guys that you have brought in to take this next leap, right? I mean, I would say if you look at the 2019 draft, finding DK Metcalf makes up for the fact that LJ Collier maybe isn't the first round kind of talent on the defensive line you'd like. Not to say he's a bad player by any means. I think he took a big step forward this past season. But this past year's draft, you got contributors from just about everyone. I mean, shoot, even Steven Sullivan contributed, even though he's not here on the roster anymore. I think the big question is...
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, you can't count that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, that's why it looks good because there's potential and there's reason to be excited, but you can't say it is good yet. DK Metcalf, obviously a home run. Marquise Blair, a lot of reason to be excited about him. Super athletic, but he hasn't done anything yet. I think I would give you from 2019. I'll give you DK Metcalf and Ugo Amadi. Beyond that, you have no idea. LJ Collier is going to be a nice rotational piece. He's not going to be a game wrecker. And so he's a dime a dozen player. Cody Barton, nice reserve linebacker. Who knows if he ever develops no more. Gary Jennings already off the roster. Phil Haynes can't stay healthy. I gave you Ugo. Ben Burke-Irvin, I think, is another depth piece. Travis Homer, just a guy, dime a dozen type of dude. DeMarcus Christmas has been hurt the whole time. And John Ursua.
He's back. Legend.
John Ursua was behind, what's the guy's name? The wide receiver that was put on the roster instead of him. And my mind is now it's down missing.
I don't blame you for not remembering his name. John Ursua has a weird cult following here, which I've always found amazing.
He does have a cult following. Who was it? Oh my gosh, it's driving me nuts.
The guy who caught the touchdown pass from Malik Turner? Or was that last year?
I don't remember.
Let's just move on beyond this part. No. Whatever the case is, the point was just made by you. You can't even remember his name.
Yeah. And then you have, then 2020, Jordan Brooks. Flashes, but he was a part-time player. You can't count that yet.
Hang on a second on Jordan Brooks. I feel like Brooks, his big problem is that he's behind both Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright. Bobby, maybe a little bit more because of the name than what he's bringing to the table. But I mean, KJ had an awesome year last year. I thought KJ was a Pro Bowl caliber player this past season. So I get why he wasn't on the field as much. And I think that when he was on the field,
I'm not indicting him. I'm not saying he's not the guy. You just can't tell me that he is the guy. You haven't seen it yet. So again, like when
only
you're looking
part-time thus far. You are right on that front.
Like, you can't say count Jordan Brooks, great pick. No, you can't. Not yet. He showed flashes. But until he is an every down guy, you can't count that. Darrell Taylor, complete wild card. Who knows? Tons of pressure on that pick given they trade up for him.
Who knows?
I'll give you Damian Lewis. Damian Lewis looks like he's going to be your right guard of the future, and you want him to get better in pass pro. But for a rookie that stepped in day one with no offseason program, no preseason games, I think he gave you everything that you could have hoped for. Colby Parkinson, no idea. DJ Dallas, I would say, is probably just a guy. Alton Robinson looks like a great pick.
Syracuse.
He's the best pick of the draft so far. Freddie Swain, serviceable. Maybe just a guy. Seven Sullivan, not on the roster anymore. So again, you look at him and say, the last 2 drafts haven't been that bad. And it's strictly from a potential standpoint. The potential is still there. But what you can definitively say was a good pick, right now, it's very minimal.
I've seen the rankings too, and it does put it in a different perspective because I have been pretty optimistic about this draft class. The way you're laying it out, though, I think is totally fair. And I guess the question that needs answering, how many of these guys are you supposed to hit on to just keep up with the Joneses? Because every now and then, I mean, you'll see a team just have a ridiculous draft class. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head from the last couple of seasons.
The Saints with the Marshawn Lattimore draft is like the recent one. I remember that was like a totally monster draft.
You could take a look. A wild guess, just given the way that they always draft, I would guess Baltimore has probably had some good drafts recently. Baltimore, for whatever reason, whether it's Ozzie Newsome or who's ever taken over for Ozzie Newsome, I just always trust them in the draft, just like I trust John Harbaugh to not know some rule and whine about it after a game. So, you look at that. How many are supposed to hit on? And I mean, obviously, you're really up what's creek when the first pick that you have is at the back of the second round, like in the 60s for your first pick in the entire draft this year.
Yeah, it's tough. Teams would love to hit on 50%. That would be a pipe dream, probably. If you can find 3 difference makers every draft and maybe 2 other role players or starters that are serviceable, kind of replacement level guys, you're feeling really good about it. But like you're seeing the effects of bad drafting catch up, and I'm just going to come through it. So you have 2012, which obviously was one of the most legendary drafts in NFL history.
Unbelievable.
2013, Kristen Michael, Kristen Michael in the second, Jordan Hill in the third. I don't think Jordan Hill's in the league anymore.
No.
Chris Harper in the fourth, not in the league anymore. Jesse Williams, Thorold Simon, Luke Wilson's the best pick of the draft, but because he had a long career, but a good player, great locker room. Like Spencer Ware, Ryan Seymour, Ty Powell, Jared Smith, Michael Bowie. They're 4 7th round picks, but like I guess my point is like you keep trading down to rack up 7th round picks. If they're all just guys, like having just extra bodies doesn't get you anywhere. Paul Richardson in the second, terrible pick. Justin Britt was fine. Yeah, he had enough good years to where you can feel good about that in the second round. Cassius Marsh, pretty much replacement level. Kevin Norwood, never did anything. Kevin Pierre-Louis, still in the league, so I guess you take that in the 4th round. 5th round, Jimmy Staten.
I hadn't heard any of those guys after that. Yeah, like
Garrett Scott in the 6th.
Sounds
Eric
like
Pinkins in the 6th. Kiero Small in the 7th.
NCAA football player, create a name guys. No offense to those guys. It's just these are guys.
2015 was a real good draft. I mean, Terry Poole, the guard, was a nightmare in the 4th round, but you have Frank Clark, Tyler Lockett, and Mark Glowinski, 3 of your first 4 picks. Ty Smith looks like he's also in the league. He's the 5th rounder. And then you waste your last 3, but 6th and 7th rounders, it's fine. And you again, CJ Procise, Nick Vanette, Reese Odiombo in the 3rd. That's 3 third-round picks in the same draft. And you get CJ Procise, Nick Vanette, Reese Odiombo. Woof. And then you have 2017. I mean, this is so bad.
And 2017, we can stop there if we keep going through the list. We're just going to get more and more frustrated. And I guess
my point is, I know, like, the names, but like, it's important to remind you that if you compound bad draft after bad draft, you now have a talent depleted roster because you haven't drafted well enough. Your roster gets expensive because you have to trade for players like Jamal Adams in order to be competitive. Then you're left with limited capital to actually go find those guys again. So what I'm saying is this is years and years. When people want to say Russell Wilson needs to take a pay cut. Well, do you want to donate money to charity if you don't think it's going to be used in the right way? Probably not. So to that end, yes, objectively, the Seahawks would be better off if Russell Wilson made less money. But to say that takes John Schneider and Pete Carroll off the hook for some really egregious drafts. And free agent signings.
I disagree with you from that perspective, and I've seen that put out there a lot. No, they are accountable for it. They are. And I mean, this isn't you telling Russ to do this. This is you asking. This is you asking Russ, right? I mean, if you were to come to him and say, look, we need help, isn't that the way that you go about doing it? Because I'm with you. If you're to say, well, look, Russ is making too much money. Well, Russ is single-handedly keeping the team in this stratosphere, in this not quite Super Bowl contender, but at least a playoff team realm that they're in right now.
Yeah, you're certainly not going, especially right now after his comments, like, hey, we need you to take a pay cut. And even just to ask him would probably send it nuclear. And that at that point, he probably asks for a trade. So it's not going to happen. I can promise you that. There is not a world in which he takes a pay cut this year. There was enough wasted money and enough wasted draft picks for him. And that would be his response. He would say, why would I give money to charity if I don't think it's going to be put to good use? But again, we're talking about a number of factors that have all led to the Seahawks being in this spot where they're in this pressure cooker of an offseason they're going to have just deadly accuracy as they maneuver through these next few months with really limited capital at their disposal.
I'm depressed now. Thanks for that.
Yeah. You're welcome. Welcome to Seattle.
Welcome to Seattle. It's cloudy outside.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as we continue to work through this, we've talked a lot about some of the possibilities this offseason, and you're going to need to come on again so we actually have some more answers, because right now it is 100% speculation, like who's a surprise cut or a free agent that you'd like most to see them sign. But let's just focus at the biggest change that they've made this offseason. Shane Waldron's the new offensive coordinator. How are you feeling about the hire? Are you optimistic that this is going to make any changes, or are you like a lot of people that are out there on Seahawks Twitter where it doesn't really matter who comes in because Pete Carroll is still the one that's in charge of things?
I think it matters. Now, does he end up being the greatest offensive coordinator of all time? We're not going to know for a while. So I don't want to go too far that direction and really make any proclamations. This guy's never been a play caller. There's some risk with that. But I'm all for hiring an up-and-comer. This is not a hire, if it goes south, that I will then retrospectively say, what were they thinking? He comes from a good pedigree. At some point, you have to get your first shot. I think I trust the offenses he's coming from, the people he's learned from. He's said all the right things so far. I think from a perception standpoint, that hire did as well with the fan base in terms of approval rating as maybe anyone else he could have gotten, bar Doug Peterson or Eric Bieniemy. So yeah, I believe in him. I think he can get the job done, and I think he's going to have a really tough job, like you mentioned, because he's sort of serving two masters, and Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson will often have different goals or not goals. The goal is the same, but different beliefs of how things should be done in terms of how they're going to get back to where they want to be. That might be a juggling act for him, but I'm going to give Shane Waldron every benefit of the doubt that he's going to be capable of doing a good job. And I'm happy for him. This is one of those things where you're happy for a young dude, an up and comer, getting an opportunity, and now he gets to work with Russell Wilson. And all right, get to work. You definitely have your work cut out for you.
Joe, one of the things that I think you're very good at, you were appreciated both on Seahawks Reddit for this and on Seahawks Twitter for this, is the questions that you ask. You ask some very tough questions. And I want to ask about, for you, what was the most uncomfortable answer that you received over the course of the past year? Because you asked a lot of, I think, tough questions. I know a lot of people are going to talk about Jamal Adams or maybe some from Pete Carroll. That's always an interesting spot to be in as someone who has been there before, more so with Bill O'Brien and like Ozzie Guillen way back in the day. It's always such a weird spot to be in when you ask a question that needs to be answered and then it just ends up going a certain way.
Yeah, Pete Carroll has gotten cagey a number of times. I think the Jamal Adams thing was obviously, it was funny and he made that a big thing. A lot of times, you kind of just learn to, I pick my spots, people are like, why didn't you ask about this? You know what? Cause I got to pick my spots. I'm not,
you have to have a relationship. Yeah. It's
every single presser, this, that, I'm going to choose things I think are really necessary. And I make a decision, whether they're the right decisions or not, who knows, up for debate. There was, I think, the most bizarre, most uncomfortable. I'm pretty good now at not getting uncomfortable. I mean, the Jamal Adams thing was wild because that was what happened on the Friday. He got defensive about it. And I guess it makes sense because he, reads in his Twitter feed all day long, blitz boy, blitz boy, blitz boy.
It's got all those Jets fans, right? All those savages.
He took that out on me to speak to everyone that's in his mentions. And that's okay. And then he, saw that I said he was defensive on Twitter, which he was. There's no denying he was defensive about it. I don't get defensive. Well, that was wild because like, I'm like, it's like this, I'm in this exact chair and you have like in the Zoom comments, you have like, hey, I'd like to ask a question. And I didn't get to me. They said, last question for Paul. And Paul always asked, you ask a question. And then so I'm like, all right, I'm not asking a question to Jamal. So I'm like on another tab, looking at something else, like trying to like do a million things post game. And then I hear Mr. Joe. There's no other Joe but me. So I'm like, oh, he's talking to me right now. So I was like, what's up? He's like, where you at? No question. And I was like, well, I didn't get to ask a question, but I'll ask you this. And, so that was that back and forth. And so, but I think most like uncomfortable, like there were times this year where Pete Carroll, where I challenged him and he maybe got understandably cagey or defensive about something, but there were times where I felt like I asked normal questions and he like got defensive about it. You're like, that's odd. I remember after Washington, they were up 20-3 and were 20 yards away from blowing that lead. And it was a really ugly second half. They went 28 minutes in the second half without scoring a point.
He was really happy with that game. And I was surprised by that too.
And I said, and the question, and the way I phrased it, I guess I can go back and listen to tone and whatever, but it wasn't, I'll tell you when I in intending to like press you on something, this was to me like a normal, why wouldn't this question be asked? And I said, your offense goes quiet like that. Is that a concern at all? And where you squander the lead late and don't score in the fourth quarter, final 28 minutes, or do you just tip your cap to a good defense? Like I gave him the out. I gave him it's a great defense, always happy to get a win. We'll always want to execute better, whatever. And, and that was it was the same thing with Jamal Adams. When you ask, well, how do you feel about your coverage? Well, there's some plays I want back, but overall I feel like I'm doing okay. And I'm getting more comfortable each and every week in a new system. Cool. That's, so when they took it this other way, you're like, that's odd. Like, oh my gosh, there's nothing to be negative about here. I don't know how you could possibly see anything negative. And it's like, what? Like, I mean, okay, that's for you guys. You guys do that. I'm not going to do that. There's nothing wrong with this, And so I took that quote and I pulled it back and used it in my column after the Rams loss when Pete Carroll said, I'm so surprised. I can't believe we're here. It's like, well, are you? Because a month ago, you said everything was all good. And so you shouldn't be surprised by this. We all tried to tell you that things were wrong. And you said, no, everything's okay. And I get that's Pete Carroll's mantra. But anyways, that's a really long response to get to. There have been moments where he has kind of pushed back on questions I did not expect him to push back on.
It's always weird, too, when we have him on Mondays. Now, I think I try to always word them as softly as possible because obviously we're with him basically for like 30 minutes straight. And there have been a couple of times he's like, Paul, you're such a worrier. You're such a worrier, man. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I am. But I'm going to keep worrying. Damn it. One last question for you, Joe. You got to do this in one word. Just one. Describe Seahawks Twitter in one word.
Wow.
It's tough. As I drink my
coffee
coffee through a straw.
To my mind. Passionate is an easy one, but I'm not going to use that. That's like a runner-up. Passionate, emotional, impulsive, lots of those. I would say frantic would maybe be the word I would use.
I like that one.
Yeah. I would also use intelligent. I think Seahawks Twitter doesn't. I think people like to poke fun at Seahawks Twitter, like, oh, the Seahawks Twitter GMs know everything. There are a lot of people in that network and community that do so much research and so much studying and are so talented. And I learn a lot from Seahawks Twitter all the time. And I value the community a lot. Now it's an emotional, hectic, and frantic community, but I think those who try to dismiss the acumen and knowledge and analytical ability of Seahawks Twitter, I think is short-sighted, and it's kind of an easy way to dismiss a group that's really ahead of a lot of things.
They for sure keep you on your toes, and that's why I've been doing this bad boy. Joe, appreciate you joining me at Joe_Fann on Twitter. Appreciate it, man. Let's do it again.
Hey, thanks so much, Paul. I appreciate it, man.